We can reframe the idea of Pride Month. We can reframe the idea of what pride means in and of itself. We can move us towards a Black Pride Month, a Woman Pride Month.
Oh, there isn't, but there should be. Why isn't there a Woman Pride Month?
So that down the road in history, we will no longer need them.
It's not that there is an either or to this conversation. It's kind of a yes and to it all.
Isn't there more work to be done? So doesn't that even more so demonstrate that Pride Month is so necessary and valid? It's a place of privilege that I know that the battles that I faced as a queer person, for the most part, are behind me.
Privilege isn't always that you are helped by something. Privilege still does come in the form of not having barriers and obstacles in your way. Another form of privilege is it's not just, or if at all, obstacles or barriers in their way, is their starting line further back.
I strongly believe that our youth, particularly our trans youth, are bombarded with messages all the time that they are not worthy. I hope that we live in a world where our youth can get constant messaging that they are worthy, that they are enough just as they are.
Happy Pride Month, everyone.
Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio.
And as you know, we are in the month of June, which is Pride Month, right?
Yay! Yes.
Yay. And we talked about Pride Month last year, which is an episode that was very near and dear to my heart. For those of you that are new, the new listeners, welcome to Simply Enough. I'm a member of the queer community, proudly married in a same-sex relationship. And this is a special month for me, and it really always has been. It's also a month in which I came out to my parents and told them on June 21st, the longest day of the year, light-wise, which is not lost on me every time that anniversary comes up. But I'm kicking us off today because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine just the other day. And that friend, another queer individual, kept saying, why do we need Pride Month? Why? Why do we need it? Are knowing that, like, you know, across the nation, there's legislation that's trying to restrict what we can and can't teach in the classrooms. And there's so much legislation about, what rights our trans individuals can have, can't have, what sports they can play, can't play, bathrooms they can use, etc. So I don't think my friend was necessarily arguing that focusing on what we can do for the queer community is not important. What I came to find out is, like, what's the benefit of a narrowly focused month as opposed to trying to live throughout the year with this idea of pride and embracing movement towards our LGBTQIA plus community and what we can do there. So we got into this kind of heated discussion about where pride fit. And we ended up narrowing down to the word. And what I came to find out was my friend really had a problem with the idea of it being called pride, which I found fascinating, right? Because I hadn't even anticipated. I was thinking more in the place of, like, you know, queer rights and you know, so often we can overlook them by thinking, oh, that's just something we're going to do. But by bringing out a month, it kind of gives a little bit of focus, which we talked about in the episode last year, that's has a benefit. And hopefully we live in a world where we don't need it anymore. But yet, anyway.
Yeah. So, can we just expound on that? Because yes, absolutely. In terms of, ideally, and ideal means it's not quite here yet, obviously, right. And maybe even heading in the opposite direction terribly. Okay, I'm editorializing. Everybody knows where I feel about this. But yes, ideally, it would be lovely to never have to do that, a singular month for awareness. But to move towards, I even hate this word, but to move towards acceptance, and I hate that word because it shouldn't even have to be about acceptance as in thumbs up, thumbs down, approve, disapprove, but still semantics. To move towards that, we at least have to increase awareness first. And if that awareness is helped by having a month, then if that's the starting point, then we'll go with what we've got, which is the starting point, and go from there. Just like I, as a woman in a male profession, it would be lovely to not carry the only banner, which I've had for many steps in my career, only woman in this, step of my career, and the only woman in this program, and only woman in this program. And it would be lovely to not have to distinguish first female or the female or the Asian or whatever, but it is what it is. And that's the reality. If we can change the perception of reality by highlighting and spotlighting, that's how we that's kind of the only way to get to normalizing something, so that it then becomes unnecessary to show a spotlight.
If we look at DEI initiatives or multicultural education initiatives on the education side, there's a great book called Multicultural Education written by James A. Banks. We've talked about this before in previous episodes, but when we look towards truly having curriculum in schools that embraces true multiculturalism, one of the first steps is what's called the Heroes and Holidays step. And this is kind of what you're talking about, which is like the acceptance step. This is where we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, or we have a day highlighting, for lack of a better word, Thanksgiving, but we try to take the indigenous people's perspective. Like we kind of spotlight these moments and these people, but that's not really getting at true multiculturalism, but it's on the journey. Okay. And James A. Banks talks about exactly what you're saying, which is, while it's not ideal and it's not where we want to land, it's still an important part of the process. It's an important part of the journey. And why, in many ways, for those of us that want to push and be more active and say, like, let's get past acceptance into embracement or into solidarity or into support, right? Something more active and engaging. Acceptance, or the Heroes and Holidays, is it exists. It's part of the journey. So
it's while part of it.
Yeah. And while it may be unsettling or feel, like not enough.
Yes.
There's still movement. There's still progress. They're still going. Right. So that's kind of what my friend was saying, which is like, I feel like we're past the month. Right. So that was like one point. Like, I feel like we're past that point. And then there are other,
to his point, and what our episode was, was, in many ways, we are past the month, because now the month, in some ways, has been trivialized by thinking that it's just about merch, right?
Exactly.
And so, yes, let's take what we got, which is this month, but then let's run with it, is what I think your friend is saying, in terms of, let's get past this month.
Yes, that's right. And really, the impetus for this conversation was a reel that this content creator made, making fun of these organizations that slap a rainbow ribbon on something to say as if they are inclusive. And then the minute that the month is over, that's like, okay, no more discounts for queer people, or like, check, let's move on, rather than actually, doing anything that's going to change the organization for the better or put kind of lasting change in place. And so they were living in this mode of also being angry at the commercialization of the month, and also the fake that happens in these corporations, as if they are really embracing more inclusive practices when they're doing it just to say that they are in the month of June. So I get a little bit, right? A little bit of that frustration too.
But that's super clear. Like that what you just said is the crux of, let's not just reduce it to a month, because then it just becomes a time in the calendar.
Exactly.
As opposed to, it almost takes away from the issue, right? And instead is like, oh, it's the time of the month. Like, or wait, that sounds like menstrual periods. It's the month of the year, right? Like, it's, oh, it's Pride Month, it must be June. So do you know what I mean? Like, it just becomes this kind of rote token thing.
Yes, exactly. So you're basically having the same we're basically having the same conversation that we did. But then the piece that surprised me the most was they moved into saying, well, we don't have like Black Pride Month, we don't have Women Pride Month, we don't have Disability Pride Month. We don't really use that word pride anywhere else. And they started to say, I take issue with the word pride because there's a hubris associated with it, right? There's a connotation embedded in the word pride that they really, really struggled with. I was not prepared for that part of the conversation, right? Because I'd never even thought about it. I was on the other side of pride being an act of self-acceptance and standing in one's place and being demonstratively open about one's acceptance and love of oneself. And I wasn't going into the 7 deadly sin place of pride, like where there's such a self-love that it actually disassociates you from any kind of connection with others or reality, or et cetera. And I found that fascinating because I had never really considered pride to be a demonstration of ego in that kind of way.
I agree. And I get it. Actually, his point, and the only thing that I say not to counter it, because I agree with the discomfort he may be feeling, or the disservice it does by using the word pride, if with its connotations it's perceived that way in terms of egoic. The only question is then, I think it's an exercise of finding a different word, because pride and the 7 deadly sins pride is when you look at pride, and if it is in a way of a means of comparison, which ultimately that's what ego is, right? So ego is that it is so individualistic that it externalizes everything else, right? And in doing so, it's comparative. That pride, I can see it being a negative and it being a disservice to the movement. But I imagine the intention was actually a place of feeling connected in the recognition that we as all humans have value, and therefore, rather than feeling less than or ashamed or in the closet or in the dark or at the back of the bus, that kind of thing, one's own value allows one to have pride in oneself. And not over others or better than others. There is no comparison. It's as you are, just enough as you are, you have value, and therefore there's a reason to have pride in that, and pride in oneself, and be proud of oneself. It is what it is in terms of the connotation of the word pride is negative, and that's a shame. And therefore, okay, let's come up with different words that connote the same thing in terms of internal sense of value and worth equal to others. But until then, it's kind of semantics, because the crux of the movement, the crux of the mission is any individual in the queer community has every reason to have worth and value and pride just as much as a cisgendered straight person. So it's funny, the pride and the crux of it is pride for equality or equity, not proud to be better than others.
So it's like you were there, because I was like, well, then we have more work to do. Not only do we have more work to do to expand the impact of inclusivity and beyond acceptance, so that queer people are embraced throughout the entire year, that we don't need a month. But I also think exactly what you're saying is the further work that we have to do is also to reframe how we see pride, because I agree with you. I see pride in through this particular lens. Why Pride Month is so important is it because it's an individual declaration of enoughness. That's how I was trying to argue it. And I understood very much what their point was. And I used this story as an example of what I think we still need to do in terms of Pride Month to reframe what we mean when we say pride. Because that message about what you were saying is just this, this non-comparative demonstration, I said, of one's enoughness is a universal message that all can have access to. Right. Truly, like Pride Month is then no longer just for queer people. It's for all people, because we are all enough. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of getting giddy about this. And my friend is like, no, it has just been commercialized and bastardized. And all that gets put on TV are, the images of the Pride Parade when things are overly sexualized. And then we see, and forgive me for painting it this way, but we see, men with beards and dresses and makeup, and that's confusing to children, blah, blah, blah. And I said, actually, I feel like it's the opposite. I feel like it is a very clear way to show children that they can be themselves, right? So then I shared this story with my friend. I said, when I was teaching, I was doing a lesson, a writing lesson, and I was working with this one particular student, and we'll call her Selena. Selena was really struggling with her story. She was just having a really hard time. She was having a hard time understanding how to follow the steps to compose it, and then what her own idea for the story was going to be. We got to the end of the unit, and Selena finished it, and we were doing a celebration where, if you wanted, it was kind of like an open mic. You could go up and read your story in front of the class. Selena was radiating that day, just like, light was just shooting out of her. She loved hearing her friends read their stories. And so I went over and I sat next to her and I said, "Are you going to read your story?" And she said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Okay, no problem. You don't have to. That's why it's there." And we had like little cups of like sparkling apple cider and things, so like it felt kind of grown up and bougie. And she said something that really floored me. She goes, "I am so proud of my book. I want that pride to be for me." Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Beautiful.
Holy shit, right? Like
beautiful.
And so when I was talking with my friend, I'm like, that to me is pride. That pride is that internal smile that she had, that she kept for herself, and that was all that she needed. Right now, this that she knew that she put in a lot of hard work. She knew that she put in a lot of effort, that it got her to a place where she could see herself differently and she could love herself differently. And that alone was all she needed. Right. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's what I think of when I think of pride. I think of pride as that moment when you just say, "I am enough." Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And necessarily so, because, language is, the whole purpose of language is to communicate. And so communication is based on delivering and receiving and understanding. So it is important to look at the semantics and the perception of the word pride, kind of like confidence. Some people automatically, when labeling or naming or blaming or shaming someone being confident, what they really mean is cocky, but confidence doesn't necessarily always mean cocky. Pride and being proud isn't necessarily, to this story with Selena, comparative. It's not one-upmanship, winner take all kind of thing. But yeah, that's a little bit of the perception now of the word pride, and the 7 deadly sins version of pride is the better than-ness. Mm-hmm. So though, to their point, we're beyond pride, I am going to say that word pride in particular, as this movement was first starting, however long ago it was first starting, that word pride was negative. That word pride was important and was necessary. And it is because the point was, it was the absolute opposite of shame. What is the opposite of pride is shame. And people in the queer community were shamed and even felt shame themselves, brought upon themselves. So it is a step and a movement within an individual to your point, claim a sense of pride for themselves. But then, yes, also for the community and society at large, it was important to swing the pendulum the other way, to say pride instead of shame. Mm-hmm. So though it is, I wholeheartedly agree with them that, boy, wouldn't it be great to move past pride and move beyond that and have more movement. still, I don't want to, negate or undermine the very clear importance of declaring pride.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing too is when, to their point of there's no Woman Pride Month and there's no Black Pride Month, when you said that, saying that that's what they said, my very reflexive reaction is like, oh, there isn't. But there should be.
But there should be. Yes.
Because then I thought to myself, Black Lives Matter, how watered down is that? And even that is creating riots in communities that are offended by the Black Lives Matter. And that's watered down. Black lives more than matter. There should be a Black Pride Month. And, more than just asking for, women equality and women equity. Yeah. Why isn't there a Woman Pride Month? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's not that there is a either or to this conversation. It's kind of a yes and it all.
Yes. Oh my God, it's like you were there. I mean, really, this is how we were all over the place, but also talking about this, like we are in the same spot at the same time. Like it sounds like we were hitting all these things. And we were looking at it different ways, but almost agreeing at the same time, which was, if there isn't a Black Pride Month, why isn't there? And if that means, and if it doesn't exist, and there should be, which you and I agree, and we don't often use the word should, but if there should be, isn't there more work to be done? If there isn't a Woman Pride Month or Disability Pride Month, isn't there more work to be done? So doesn't that even more so demonstrate that Pride Month, Queer Pride Month, let's say, is so necessary and valid, right? And
I'm already hearing it in my head of any listeners or readers who don't like, or listeners or viewers who already don't like us. The thinking, well, why is there no cisgender Pride Month or cisgender white Pride Month? And all I can say is that's because it's lived 365 days of the year.
It really is. It really is. Because, well, I don't.
Sorry, I had to take that bullet out of the gun because I can already hear the counter arguments, and I'm like, yeah, we're ready.
Every day is cisgendered white Pride Month. It really is, which we're working against. Like, this is why these months are important. This is why we need these steps of having these months. And I also think it's a place of privilege that I, as a 41-year-old cisgendered male, live in, because I'm older. I've had more life experience, that I know that the quote unquote battles that I faced as a queer person, for the most part, are behind me. I don't have to come out to people anymore. I also am out in my place of business. Like, I live with my husband. My life is an amalgamation of all these experiences that I have lived that have gotten to me to where I am. I think it's a place of privilege to believe that teenagers and young adults, or even, young people who are doing a lot of self-exploration and trying to figure out their identity, are not internalizing negative messages that hit them all the time. I think that they still do. And specifically our trans youth, even more so, why pride is important and why it needs to be that strong, assertive declaration, to your point, because I think they're still hearing the messages that they are not enough, that there's something wrong with them, and that they need to change, or that their parents need to change, or that the world around them doesn't have to embrace them. So I'm getting a little worked up about this.
And they're wrong for who they are.
And they're wrong for who they are.
Ultimately, that's the message being sent, is you are wrong for who you are.
So I'm doubling down that Pride is even more important. Pride Month is even more important, because I'm also sitting in a place of privilege where I'm somewhat in quotes past that point. And I've also lived enough to be able to know how to filter that messaging. Or I just think it's a place of privilege that I have in my age and experience. And I really strongly believe that our youth are bombarded with messages all the time, particularly our trans youth right now, that they are not worthy. And therefore, it has to be a strong, assertive declaration. It has to be pride. So anyway, I was like, no, that word is important.
The word is important. And rather than perhaps not changing the word, and I don't know how we would ever do this, right, but rather than not changing the word, change the understanding of the meaning behind the word pride. and how that can apply to anybody and everybody. So therefore, why vilify it? Why be ashamed of the word pride, which was a counter to the shame that began it all, right? I also just kind of want to touch on, you use the word privilege, and I just feel it's an opportune time to have those who might immediately and reflexively say, well, I wasn't privileged, especially, of course, I'm talking about, the cisgendered, white male. But, the immediate defensive reaction perhaps of like, well, I wasn't privileged, like nothing was handed to me and all this kind of stuff. And that's true. There's no question that people pull themselves by lift themselves up by the bootstraps and they have what they earn, and that's all wonderful. The only thing I'm going to say though is that privilege isn't always that you are helped by something. Privilege also is when obstacles are not in your way. Let that sit there.
Freaking men.
You know what I mean, though? Like, so a lot of people are like, I wasn't privileged. I didn't live a privileged life. I don't come from a wealthy background, and nobody helped me. And I get all of that, and that can be very much true. And there are those that lived a more privileged life than you might have, for example. But still, privilege still does come in the form of not having barriers and obstacles in your way.
So, separate conversation with another friend of mine who identifies as non-binary. I took the opportunity, because this is a friend that I feel safe with, and I think my friend feels safe with me, that I could ask questions about their journey towards knowing and then talking freely or coming out about their non-binariness. What I realized in that conversation was that this individual essentially has to come out twice. They come out as non-binary and have to have not have to, but they invite people into that conversation and whatever questions these people are going to ask. And apparently they ask like a whole host of questions. But then there's the other question about, okay, well, what does that mean about who you're attracted to or like in a relationship? Now, why that's important, to your point about obstacles or non-obstacles in one's way, is when I first came out as a gay male, that gave people two pieces of information. It gave them my sexual orientation, right? And it also gave my gender identity. So I didn't really have the second obstacle that my non-binary friend has to face, which is they choose to tell people that they're non-binary, and then, well, what does that mean? And like, does that mean you're not a female, you're not a male? And then like go through all those questions. And then the follow-up questions is like, well, like, what about who you date? And it's like, well, that has nothing to do with it. That's not really connected to what I'm telling you right now. I had never considered that, because to your point, I lived in a place of privilege. I didn't have the second obstacle of then wanting or to tell people about who I wanted to enter into a relationship with. So you're absolutely spot on. And even in the queer community, we have different journeys. And I was sitting in a place of privilege that this person, who by all accounts were, siblings in the queer community, is still having a very different journey. And I have a more privileged, less obstacled journey than this person does. So just a specific example to give you to the very incredible point you're making right now.
And I love that you use the word, journey, and how the journeys are different, because another nuance to privilege is, okay, yes, you might not have been helped along the way, with the wind behind your back, but, privilege is whether or not you have obstacles or barriers in your way. Another way or form of privilege is, okay, in this journey, if we're all going to agree on at the same finish line, where is your place at the starting line? So, and I have this conversation a lot in terms of, obviously, like I said, being a woman in a very male-dominated and alpha male-dominated profession. My friends and family, who are Black Americans, it's not just, or if at all, obstacles or barriers in their way, which, let's be honest, there are. But even if there weren't, is their starting line further back than a cisgendered white male? And I'm not here to bash cisgendered white males. my husband being one, let's be honest. And so I'm not here to bash. I'm just wanting to point out subtle nuances or glaring, obvious issues, but just point out and clarify, and just maybe throw out some thought-provoking images or imagery, if you will, in terms of privilege and where privilege comes in terms of feeling shame or pride, or feeling successful or defeated, or feeling enough or not enough.
Isn't it interesting, to your point about whether or not the cisgendered male able-bodied get defensive about, well, blah, 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 me, then it becomes about their reaction to what those less privileged experience, that somehow now it has to be comparative. And furthermore, doesn't that also just absolutely demonstrate your privilege, that I, as a queer person, talk about my experience and somehow it becomes a commentary on your experience, rather than why can't it just be about mine right now? But the mere fact that it becomes about somebody else, when no, this is actually supposed to be a moment about me and my journey and what I'm sharing with you, that alone is, I think, evidence in a way that we do live in a cisgendered male, able-bodied, dominant world, that you then feel like it's commentary on you, when in fact it's not necessarily that way at all.
Mm-hmm. We're not in any way meaning to be, offensive or argumentative or confrontational. When we say cisgendered, cisgendered able-bodied white male, it's just because that is the epitome of, because we're not saying that it's every single cisgendered white able-bodied male. It's not. It's like that's unfair. That's stereotyping. That's unfair. That's just as bad profiling as discriminatory profiling, if you know what I mean. But we're just using it as an example, epitomizing in any and every category what is the more dominant, correct, or the more privileged.
Exactly. When you are talking, I feel like you've seen this video, so maybe you can help me remember the details. I believe it was a football coach that had all of his players standing on one line. And the task before the players was essentially to run 50 yards or 100 yards or whatever. And whoever crossed the finish line first, I think, got some kind of award or prize or something like that. But then it wasn't like, okay, fire the gun, everybody go. It was, okay, wait, take one step forward if this, take one step forward if this, and it was like one step forward
or the opposite. So or one step back.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like take one step forward if both of your parents went to college, right? That kind of thing.
Yes.
And the whole point was exactly what you're saying, is sometimes privilege is not just what obstacles you have or have not in your way. It's also where your starting point was. And that was a very real way to capture via data, like true data, looking at, incarceration rates, high school dropout rates, high school college graduation rates, et cetera, based on all these demographics, that not everyone's starting in this same spot also. And on this field, there were no obstacles. There were no cones. There were no blockers, nothing. It was literally.
And there's no carts to help somebody else run faster or catch a ride.
Correct. Even more to articulate your point of not everyone's in the same starting block also. When we think about change and we think about how we can reframe the idea of Pride Month, we can reframe the idea of what Pride means in and of itself. We can move us towards a Black Pride Month, a Woman Pride Month, Disability Pride Month, so that down the road in history, we will no longer need them, right?
That's right.
I propose that the little change that we can influence potentially here, simply enough, is that listeners reframe their way of thinking about pride. And then we invite you to talk to others about this conversation so as to cascade that change, cascade that reframing, cascade that embracement, not just acceptance, but that love, that embrace, that inclusive, that holds you close to yourself and to others. So that in the thinking and the talking about it with others, we do two things. First, we move us closer towards not needing a Pride Month necessarily anymore, but we also move people away from the idea that pride is a comparative measure of me versus you. And we move towards a moment of true self-love, a true self-acceptance, a moment of truly seeing one as worthy and enough, so that we move all of us towards a reframing of the word pride. And we also move us away from the idea that we need it anymore. So that might be the little change that we can affect right now. Because we talked about some big things, right? Some big movement.
Yeah.
I truly do hope this. I hope that we live in a world where our youth can get constant messaging that they are worthy, that they are enough just as they are, that they are loved for who they are, and that who they are can evolve, can grow as they grow. And no matter what it looks like, or however they see themselves, that they will still be embraced and loved. Because right now that messaging is not what they're getting. And then that we grow up to be adults like you and me who love ourselves and remember that we are not just simply enough.
We are all more than enough.
Just as we are.
Period.
Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride Month, everyone.
Mwah.